Keanu Reeves first noticed her on a night when the cold was particularly unforgiving. A night when the chill seeped into every corner and left its mark on those already struggling. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. In a dimly lit parking lot, parked under a canopy of bare trees and scattered streetlights, was a car that looked older than time itself. Its windows were fogged and its exterior bore the marks of weather and neglect. Inside that car lived a homeless mother, whose life had been reduced to the narrow confines of its worn interior, and her baby, wrapped in mismatched blankets that told stories of desperation and hope. The baby's faint cries reverberated in the quiet of the night, punctuating the stillness with hints of vulnerability, while the mother's exhaustion was etched in every line on her face, a face that carried more burdens than words could express. What Keanu would do next would change the course of their lives and leave anyone who heard the story utterly speechless. Before continuing with this account, we invite you to share your location in the comments and subscribe to the channel. For tomorrow, another stirring narrative will be unveiled. Earlier that day, after wrapping up errands at the supermarket, Keanu Reeves had left with 2 shopping bags in hand. The night air was crisp and alive with the rustling of leaves as a gentle breeze passed by, carrying with it the scent of distant rain and memories of better days. Adjusting the hood of his jacket, Keanu surveyed his surroundings with a practiced eye, a habit refined over years of being in the public spotlight, where every detail mattered. His day on set had been long but fulfilling, and with the unexpected gift of free time, he had chosen to engage in the simple, almost sacred tasks of daily life: picking up groceries, exchanging brief smiles with strangers, and finding solace in the mundane. In parking lots and checkout lines, amidst the soft hum of everyday activity, he found a balance, a respite from the chaotic whirl of fame. After completing his shopping, Keanu retraced his steps back to the parking lot. It was then that something unusual caught his attention. Tucked away in a far-off corner of the lot was an old car, a relic of a bygone era. Its fogged windows gave it an almost spectral appearance, and the sight of clothes swaying gently inside, caught in the soft current of air, added to its eerie charm. Keanu frowned as he observed the scene. There was something undeniably off, a subtle dissonance in the way the car sat alone in the vast darkness. Almost simultaneously, his attention shifted to a woman methodically pushing aside shopping carts. Her clothing was clearly worn and threadbare, and her every movement betrayed an overwhelming fatigue mixed with a desperate need to remain unseen. She moved with a cautious deliberateness, as if each step carried the weight of an unspoken story, a story of loss, struggle, and survival. Keanu's gaze shifted back to the old car. The woman had not simply passed by. She returned to it repeatedly, as though the car served as her sole anchor amid the tumult of her life. A single piercing thought raced through his mind. Could that car truly be her home? The notion sent a shiver of empathy through him. Moved by compassion, Keanu decided to approach her slowly. He was determined not to startle her, for he knew that kindness needed to be gentle when offered to someone so vulnerable. As he drew nearer, he greeted her softly, "Hi." At that moment, the woman, who had just been about to nudge a shopping cart aside, paused abruptly. Her eyes met his for a split second before darting away, as if she wished to disappear into the night. "Are you all right? Is there anything I can do to help?" he asked in a warm, measured tone. Her reply came in clipped, cool tones. "No, I'm fine, thank you." Yet even as her words reassured, her body language told a different tale, one of trepidation and guarded sorrow. With trembling hands, she gripped the cart tightly and turned away with hurried steps toward her car. Keanu offered a final, understanding nod, adding quietly, "Okay, I understand. If you ever need something, I'll be nearby." With that, she retreated, almost mechanically, sliding into the driver's seat as if the routine had become second nature. Keanu lingered, watching her settle in, when his attention was drawn to the fogged window of the car. There, in a soft, indistinct outline, he could make out the silhouette of a baby nestled in her arms. The sight made his heart tighten. He knew he could not simply walk away from this scene. Even though the woman had adjusted her hold on the baby, the image of that fragile life continued to haunt Keanu's thoughts. Once he got into his own car, he cast one final glance toward that far corner of the lot, where the baby's silhouette remained visible through the haze. Closing his eyes for just a moment, he allowed himself to absorb the gravity of what he had witnessed before starting his engine. There was a conviction in his heart, this night's events could not be left to chance. The following morning, the memory of that cold, desolate night stirred Keanu from his thoughts. He found himself drawn back to the same supermarket parking lot, unable to shake the haunting images from the previous day. The memory of the woman's tired expression, the unsettling presence of the old car with its fogged windows and cluttered interior, all swirled together in his mind. As he parked his car discreetly, he soon saw her again. This time, she was walking slowly toward her car, a plastic bag clutched in her hand. Keanu watched intently as she placed the bag into the back seat, every movement laced with a quiet resignation. Once she had settled inside, he retrieved 2 items he had brought from home, a bottle of mineral water and a brand new, unopened blanket. Aware that any act of kindness must be offered with discretion to avoid causing embarrassment, he calmly walked up to her car and placed the items on the hood, ensuring they were clearly visible but without uttering a single word. Then, returning to his own vehicle, he sat patiently and waited. After a few tense moments, the woman opened her car door and peered cautiously at the hood, her eyes fixed on the unexpected gifts. She looked around as if trying to spot who might have left them, her expression a mixture of surprise and cautious curiosity. Keanu remained silent, allowing her the space to accept the gesture on her own terms. At length, she reached out, took the water bottle and the blanket, and murmured something under her breath, a word or two lost in the ambient noise of the parking lot, before hurrying back into the car and shutting the door firmly. With mixed feelings of relief and lingering concern, Keanu started his car and drove away, knowing that his small act of kindness might only be a drop in the vast ocean of her troubles. 2 days later, driven by an increasing need to help, Keanu returned to the same parking lot. He sensed that he needed to engage with her once more, this time with even more sensitivity. From a discreet distance, he observed her as she methodically pushed shopping carts, her face etched with the deep lines of exhaustion and hardship. When she finally neared her car, he stepped forward softly and greeted her. "Hi." The simple greeting startled her. She halted abruptly, clearly uncomfortable with his sudden presence. "I'm the guy who left the water and the blanket yesterday," he said with a gentle smile. "I hope it wasn't too intrusive." Her eyes, still cautious yet reflecting a small spark of curiosity, met his. "Why do you ask?" she replied, her tone edged with a hint of reproach. "I noticed you yesterday and thought you might need them," Keanu explained with a shrug that spoke more of empathy than obligation. "I understand if you'd prefer not to talk. I'm not trying to intrude." For a long moment, silence hung between them until she softly said, "Thank you for the water and the blanket." Each word carried the weight of her guarded heart. Nodding, Keanu added, "I just want to help if you'll let me. And if not, that's perfectly all right. Sometimes accepting help isn't a sign of weakness, but a step toward healing." Though she did not immediately reply, Keanu noticed the slightest softening in her posture, a tender sign of gratitude. Just then, a muffled cry emerged from inside the car, a cry that unmistakably belonged to a baby. Keanu paused, listening intently as the soft sound unsettled her. She hurriedly opened the door to rock the baby, her movements brisk and anxious. After a moment's pause, Keanu asked gently, "Do you need anything else for him? Perhaps some formula, diapers, or something of that sort?" Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she finally, in a barely audible whisper, admitted, "I need milk." Recognizing that this small confession was a breakthrough, Keanu nodded in understanding. "Please wait here, I'll be right back," he assured her before quickly heading to the supermarket. When he returned, he carried a bag filled with essential supplies: powdered milk, a pack of diapers, and a bundle of wipes. Though the woman's face still betrayed suspicion, she accepted the items with a soft, nearly inaudible, "thank you," handling them as if they were precious treasures. As she adjusted the baby in her arms, Keanu stood quietly by her side. "I know this may feel intrusive, but if you ever need anything else, I'll be around," he promised gently. For a moment, she hesitated before softly replying, They weren't meant to be like this," her voice trailing off into the ambient night. In that instant, Keanu realized that her story was only beginning. A narrative much deeper and more poignant than anyone could imagine, and one that would change both of their lives forever. The next day, with the same unwavering compassion, Keanu returned once again to the parking lot. Though the physical scene had not changed, the woman's demeanor seemed subtly transformed. Standing outside her car with the baby cradled in her arms, She gazed into the distance with an expression that blended exhaustion and quiet resignation. Yet there was also a hint of openness in her eyes, as if the seeds of trust had begun to sprout. "Hi," Keanu said softly, careful to maintain a respectful distance. The woman, startled yet no longer as guarded as before, replied simply, "You came back." Keanu smiled, his tone warm and sincere. "I said I'd be around. I hope I didn't make you feel pressured yesterday," he explained gently. She shook her head slowly and managed, "No, it was kind of you." Sensing that the moment was right for a deeper conversation, Keanu asked, "May I sit?" pointing to the curb beside her car. After a brief pause and a hesitant nod, she allowed him to take a seat. Resting his arms on his knees and letting a comfortable silence settle between them, he continued, "You don't have to share anything you're not comfortable with, but may I ask your name?" After a moment's silence, her voice came out softly. "Emily. I'm Emily. And your little one? What is his name?" Keanu inquired, glancing gently at the baby who now lay quietly. "Oliver," she replied in a hushed tone. "Oliver is a strong name. I really like it," he said, and the compliment seemed to ease some of the tension that had long gripped her. After a brief pause, Keanu shared a piece of his own story, saying, "I, too, have had to face dark times. I've lost people who meant everything to me, and there were moments when I wasn't sure I could go on. But I was given help, and sometimes accepting help is what saves us." Emily listened intently, her eyes never leaving the baby cradled in her arms. Finally, with a tremor in her voice, she admitted, "Sometimes I feel so alone, like no one truly cares." Keanu shook his head, his tone resolute and kind. "I care. I care very much, and I want to help, if you'll allow me." Though she did not reply immediately, the vulnerability in her eyes was unmistakable, a small opening in the fortress of her guarded heart. Later that night, while Emily slept inside her car with Oliver pressed close to her chest, Keanu returned quietly. This time, he brought with him bags filled with baby food, essential hygiene supplies, and small, comforting toys. Carefully, he arranged these items by the car door and left a handwritten note that simply read, "No strings attached, just care." The next morning, when Emily awoke to discover these offerings, she was overwhelmed by a mix of gratitude and internal conflict. Clutching one of the bags close to her chest, she whispered, "Thank you. This means so much." Keanu, still watching discreetly from a distance, smiled to himself and murmured, "I'm glad it helped. If you need anything else, just let me know." After a pause filled with heavy silence, Emily hesitated before confiding in him, "I don't usually speak about this, but I lost everything. My husband, my home, my entire life, and what followed was almost too hard to bear." Keanu's expression grew solemn as he listened. "It all began when my husband, Liam, died in a car accident. He was coming home from work on what should have been an ordinary evening. When the police arrived, an officer calmly noted that he hadn't suffered, but nothing could have prepared me for the shock. He was simply gone." Her voice cracked as she recounted how her world had unraveled. Mounting bills, in-laws insisting she was unfit to care for Oliver, and a bitter custody battle that left her with nowhere to turn. "They claimed I was too unstable, and without enough money for a proper lawyer, I had no choice but to leave everything behind. I packed up my few savings and moved to another state, hoping it would only be temporary," she said, her tone laced with bitterness. "I managed to get a job at a cafe, and for a while, I felt I was making progress. Then a customer began harassing me with vile remarks, and one day, I snapped. The manager didn't care, and I was fired on the spot." Keanu listened with a heavy heart as she recounted her eviction, the car that became her only shelter, and the relentless judgment from those around her. "I know it's wrong, I should be doing better for Oliver, who deserves so much more, but I'm just so tired," she confessed in a trembling voice. With quiet empathy, Keanu said, "You're fighting a battle no one should have to face alone. Every day, you stand up for Oliver, and that is far more courageous than most can claim." Tears glistened in Emily's eyes as she whispered, "But what do I do now? I feel I've reached the end of my rope." Looking deeply into her eyes, Keanu reassured her, "We'll figure it out together, I promise you that." Rising from his seat, he added, "Please wait here, I'll be back in 20 minutes." And with that, he left. Emily watched him leave, her heart caught between a renewed flicker of hope and the deep-seated fear of vulnerability. Inside his car, Keanu immediately set about making calls, mobilizing the resources and connections he possessed. "I'm going to start something big," he murmured quietly as he texted close friends, detailing her situation with unwavering urgency. 40 minutes later, he returned to the supermarket parking lot with his engine still idling softly. Emily, still seated inside her old car with Oliver, lifted her head at the sound of his return. Her eyes, a blend of skepticism and cautious curiosity, followed him as he approached carrying a small envelope. "I've arranged a room for you and Oliver," he explained gently. "It's a modest motel, clean and safe. You can rest there tonight and we can discuss the next steps tomorrow." Clutching Oliver protectively, she hesitated before saying, "I can't accept this. I don't want charity." Keanu's voice remained calm and reassuring as he replied, "It's not charity, it's help. Everyone needs help sometimes. Please, let me do this for you." After what felt like an eternity of internal struggle, she reached out and took the envelope. Inside, she discovered a motel room key, a note with the motel's address, and some cash to cover food expenses. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're welcome," he replied softly, adding, "I'll drive with you to make sure you get there safely." At the motel, the room was simple yet felt like a luxury compared to the confines of her car. A large, neatly made bed with fresh sheets, and a small private bathroom bathed in a warm, gentle light greeted her as she entered. She carefully laid Oliver on the bed and tucked him in as best as she could, and for the first time in weeks, he slept soundly, free from the constant discomfort of living in a car. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, tears streaming down her face as she gazed at her sleeping son. In that moment, she felt a spark of safety and hope that had long been absent from her life. Outside the motel, Keanu took a moment to reflect on the gravity of the situation. He recognized that while providing a safe room or some cash was meaningful, it was only a starting point. The system that had failed her required something much more substantial, a new beginning that would allow her to rebuild her life with dignity. Grasping his phone tightly, he began calling friends and contacts, determined to mobilize every resource available. "I'm going to give her and Oliver the fresh start they deserve," he whispered with resolute determination. The following morning, Keanu rose early and set his plans into motion. He had spent the night coordinating calls, gathering resources, and mapping out a series of practical solutions for Emily. His first stop was a community center he had long supported, a place known for its compassion and for helping people rebuild their lives. Upon arriving, he met with the center's director and explained Emily's dire circumstances. She needed temporary housing, social assistance, and, if possible, a job. The director listened intently and assured him, "We can arrange temporary housing for a few weeks, connect her with social workers, and even refer her to job opportunities." Deeply appreciative, Keanu expressed his gratitude and made a generous donation to help not only Emily but others in similar situations. Later that afternoon, he returned to the motel. Emily, sitting on the edge of the bed with Oliver in her arms, opened the door when she heard a soft knock. Standing there with a few shopping bags, Keanu said, "I brought something for you." He handed her the bags containing new clothes for both her and Oliver, along with a basic hygiene kit. Overwhelmed, Emily responded, "I don't know how to thank you, you've already done so much." Keanu shook his head and replied, "There's no need for thanks right now. If you're ready, I'd like to talk about our next steps." With a nod of reluctant acceptance, Emily invited him in while Oliver played quietly with one of the toys. Keanu explained, "I've secured a temporary place for you and Oliver, and I've spoken with a few contacts about job opportunities. Everything depends on what you feel comfortable with." Still in disbelief, Emily asked, "Why are you doing all this for us?" Her voice trembled as Keanu replied softly, "Because I believe everyone deserves a chance to start over. When I have the resources to help, it would be wrong not to." Later that day, as Keanu accompanied Emily to the community center, they were greeted by the director with warmth and understanding. The center, though modest in appearance, radiated a sense of hope and welcome with its clean, orderly rooms and a communal space designed to support families in need. Emily was shown a small room furnished with a bed and a crib for Oliver. Overwhelmed by the kindness around her, she whispered, "I don't know how I can ever repay you." Keanu smiled gently and said, "Just focus on you and Oliver right now. This isn't charity, it's a new beginning. That night, after settling Oliver into his crib, Emily allowed herself to cry. A cathartic release of all the pain and despair that had built up over the years, as if each tear carried away a piece of her burden. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Emily began to settle into a new routine with the support of the community center and Keanu's steadfast connections. She managed to secure a part-time job as a receptionist at a small office, a modest step that gradually helped her rebuild her confidence. On her very first day, Keanu even walked her to the office door, reassuring her softly, "This is just the beginning. You're going to do great." Nervously, she entered the building and was greeted with warm smiles by both her new colleagues and a compassionate manager who understood the hardships she had faced. Each day, despite the physical exhaustion, Emily returned home with a growing sense of control and hope for the future. That evening, as she recounted her difficult decision to allow her estranged in-laws a chance to visit Oliver on her own terms, Keanu remarked, "That was a brave choice. It shows you are in control now." Emily's smile, a mixture of gratitude and determination, shone as she watched Oliver playing in their modest home. A future where she was no longer alone was beginning to take shape. One day, while sharing a quiet moment over coffee at a local cafe, Emily looked earnestly at Keanu and said, "One day, I promise I'll pay back everything you've done for me." Keanu gently shook his head and replied, "Every step you take to improve your life and Oliver's is repayment enough. I never did any of this expecting anything in return." Emily's smile broadened as she added, "I want to help others someday, just as you helped me." Keanu nodded. "That's the best way to pay it forward. Let your story inspire others." As evening fell and they bid each other farewell, Keanu looked up at the starry sky, feeling deeply that by helping Emily, he had been transformed as well. His heart swelled with gratitude for what they had achieved together. That night, in her modest new apartment where Oliver now slept soundly in a proper crib, Emily lay awake watching him. With a soft murmur, she whispered to herself, "Perhaps this is only the beginning." Though the future still held challenges, she felt ready to face them with renewed courage and hope. Every day, she and Oliver carried within them the belief that even in the darkest moments, a ray of unexpected light could show them the way forward. If you enjoyed this story of resilience, hope, and compassion, please click to explore more heartwarming tales that remind us how small acts of kindness can change lives, and in doing so, ignite a future filled with endless possibilities.